if we knew we were going to sign Yankos, maybe Ruby wouldn't have been the mid laner we would have gone for, right?
In part 2 of this episode, we talk about the tragedy of the North American Academy system,
Poppy and Firefight didn't even get their first chance. And to me, that's the tragedy, right?
the problems that rookies face in North America,
Like, this is the problem, right? You fail and then you're done. You have to be allowed to fail.
how switching out a coach can lead to championships,
If Mac was in charge of FlyQuest, do you think that they would compete for the title? I think they would, right?
I think so,
Because he's
yeah, and exactly how you can get on a top ERL team if you're aspiring to become a pro player in North America or Europe.
like, if you get top 50 in EU solo queue, you will get a trial.
I will sort of shift the focus a little bit to integrating players. So now you have the coaches. Roster building is something you brought up. Why? I guess I'll start specifically with Heretics. Um, Evi had probably one of his worst like individual performances, at least in the beginning. I think he got better towards the end, but it almost seemed like he just wasn't comfortable playing anything but Cassante. And I don't think it's because Evi's a bad player, because we've seen him smurf in the world stage. Maybe smurf is a strong word, but he's played very well. And for him to almost have such a regression, my mind always jumps to um, he's not being well integrated. I think Ruby not playing well after probably like being. I think we've heard people talk about Ruby since 2019, like just hyping him up, and then I think he also played on ERLs, and then he comes to Heretics, and he doesn't really show up. Is that like what would you say about integrating players? There's also like FlyQuest, for example, with Vikla and
Oh, of
Prince.
course.
There's so many examples that I could go through, but specifically with you, with Evi and Ruby, like what
Ruby?
happened there?
Okay, so I mean, I've been very vocal about this, right? I can talk about Ruby actually a bit more, which is that for people that don't know, Ruby is the kind of was in the way that I heard about Ruby first was actually when he was on what was the team called? It was called VSG. Uh, and VSG, who for people who don't know, were like one of the top teams in Korea when LS was coaching in challenges.
Mm-hmm.
BBQ Oliver's, I think, was LS's team, and this is kind of how I knew the first time I saw Ruby. Right, I saw Ruby as he was this mid laner who was always really really playing well and was kind of playing really, really well in that kind of Korean challenges. I'm not an expert on Korean challenges, right? I was just watching it because, it was very interesting that LS was there and Malice was like there, and I just wanted to see how they were doing. And then I was like, huh, that Ruby guy is pretty good. Like, I'll make a note of him. I'll keep track of him later, right? Like, and obviously then he had a career in China, and he had a career, uh, and then obviously COVID hit, and then things were really really difficult, right? Because I think he was on a tie. He was in the PCS, but then they had to play games on like 150 plus ping, right? And his what happened when he was in LPL is that he was on a team. His jungler got banned in the match fixing scandal. Ruby
Yeah.
completely clean, right? Like I mean, obviously we did our background check on this, right? Like nothing at all that suggests anything on in that regard. But and his team, he was on Rogue Warriors. His team, which was a mid jungle centric team, suddenly lost the jungler on that team, and then he was like kind of scapegoated a bit, right? And I think Ruby is one of those players that has had a very very unfortunate career. But I think that the issues that we had on Heretics is that our roster was not supposed to have, and to be clear, this is not things that I'm saying here for the first time, right? Our roster was not supposed to have Yankos on it at the start. Our roster was supposed to be like a rookie roster. We take some high risks on players to develop, and Ruby and Evi were supposed to be kind of this kind of veteran, stable presence that would allow the other players on the team to kind of find their footing. And obviously Mercer wasn't a rookie, but was essentially a rookie, so second year player, Jack, and we were looking at some rookie junglers. I don't know if I'm allowed to say names, but one of them's not in LEC and two of them are in LEC, right? Um, but uh, or today they're in LEC. I won't go into more detail than that. But basically, this was kind of the roster, and okay, if the team didn't do well at the start, that's fine. We believe we had some really high potential players, and see what they can do. Make it okay for them to take risks. A bit like SK ran their project very similar to this. They had XKick, they had DOS last year, and they were kind of trying to give XKick the ability to kind of grow into this role, right? And this is something that was the initial project that, and then obviously we right at the end of the off season we were told Jankos is available, and obviously if Jankos is available, Jankos is the best Western jungler of all time, and probably I would argue he's the best Western jungler now. But I could argue, I don't think anyone would dispute that he's not top three. Right? Like some
Mm.
people would dispute he's the top. I don't want to cause a flame war with Razok fans and Yank fans and Blabber fans. I don't care, right? Like
And Yoya
like
fans, yeah.
yeah, and you're your fans, right? But we can all agree that he's top three, right? I think that most people would agree that Jankos was top three. I hope so, right? Like, um, so when you have that opportunity, obviously, like you need to go, right? And you need to go and sign this player, right? There's no question, right?
Yeah.
Heretics coming into the league with the option to go Jankos should have gone Jankos, right? But what was the knock-on effect from that, right? A roster which should have been, uh, oh, it's easy to make mistakes. There's no pressure. Everyone expects us to be 10th. Push, develop, see what you can do, and let's see your limits for the players. A little bit like 2020 Mad Lions, with Humanoid I think was really, really undervalued in 2019. People kind of looked at Kobe and Zirkzee and Chachi, as like kind of the stars of that team, and Humanoid was just somebody who was doing a role, right? Uh, Unfairly, I would say, but that's kind of the perception. People
Really?
in hindsight, yeah, because people were saying, "Oh, Nemesis is definitely better." Like, and Perks is definitely better. Humanoid. Most people were ranking Humanoid 5-6. Uh, Back in the day,
Do you not
the
think he
hype
was
was the hype was
more enabling like in 2019? I feel 2020 is when he really became more of like demanding resources. At least from the
sure.
outside, that's how it
No,
felt.
no. I mean, enabling is fair, right? But I'm not talking about his role in the team. I'm talking about public perception over how good he was.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Okay, so public perception of how good Humanoid was, I thought this was absurd, right? I thought that like tier one is Caps, tier two is Nemesis Humanoid, right? Like no debate. I thought Humanoid was better, but I like people who take insane risks, right? And Humanoid was taking really insane risks, and Nemesis was playing more stable, right? But I think Nemesis was smarter about the game in 2019 for sure, but he was playing more within himself. Whereas Humanoid maybe learned a little bit more through experimentation, right? But essentially, to me, it was really, really clear tier list, but the public perception was not that, and it was really, really crazy. So there was no pressure on the 2020 roster, right? Because people didn't really understand how good Humanoid was. There were four rookies coming in, and in that environment, you could test your limits. Your Kazi, you put Kazi in G2 in 20, like, okay, Pokes was in G2, right? But imagine Pokes isn't in G2, he's retiring or something. You put Kazi in there in that roster. The How can he possibly develop? How can he possibly develop his fundamentals? How can he possibly become the player that he is today, right? Uh, but because you had no pressure, it became a lot easier. And let me be clear, like that 2020 Mad Lions team entered their games on stage where they just entered, like, but it didn't matter, right? Because it's four rookies and Humanoid. Who cares, right? Like, and that I think that was kind of a lot of the issue that you had, right? You went from a team where people were coming into the league and. um with no expectations, let's see what Heretics have to offer, to being a team of this team has Jankos, we expect things from this team. And especially because Jankos played a more carry role, which he could always play. Jankos is like insane on carries, right? But now it was really, really obvious to everyone how well Jankos was playing. And then, okay, the team isn't doing well. Who's to blame?
Hmm.
Well, you don't blame your rookie AD carry. You don't blame Jack. You don't blame Massa because there were no expectations of these guys, right? Evi basically can't speak English, so who are you going to blame? There's only one person left to blame, right? And I think it was really, really hard for Ruby. I think Ruby basically wasn't given a shot at, like, what happened at TSM is, I mean, he was an impulse. Like they couldn't get him his visa in time, right? So then why are you signing him in the first place? But the thing about Ruby is his scrim performance was like he was a really good scrim player, right? And the funny thing is that in scrims he would play things like Irelia. We play Irelia Sejuani all the time in scrims, right? And Vladimir and all of these like picks. And on stage, because he knows that the public is focused on him, and he knows that the blame is going to be on him, um, he's Azir every game, right? And I think Evi was different. We'll talk about Evi in a sec, right? But for me, this is the sadness of Ruby. It's that he has a really good Riven, he has a really good Camille, he has a really good Irelia, and we're never playing them. We're never playing them on stage. There's times where on stage I've asked him to pick these picks, and he's like, no, 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 I don't feel it's comfortable here, right? But why is this? Would you, if let's say his jungler, let me just pick a random ERL jungler. Let's say his jungler is Linkas. Okay, Link, just an arbitrary. Let's say his jungler is Linkas, right? Who's a top ERL prospect, or Isma. Isma. Okay. Um, do you think that he's going to have these kind of issues? He's going to be nervous like this? No, he's going to be thinking like, give me the champion. I'm going to 1v9, and if I don't, who cares, right? And I think this was the issue bringing in Ruby, and maybe if we knew we were going to sign Yankos, maybe Ruby wouldn't have been the mid laner we would have gone for, right? We would have gone for maybe another option, but his job was kind of to provide stability to the team to allow other people to kind of develop, right? I would say every situation is really, really sad to me because in Europe, everyone thinks he's the worst top. Well, I mean, lots of people think he's the worst top laner in the league, which is not the case, right? Like, I mean, I wouldn't say he was like top three, but I would say he was like four to six, somewhere in the 4 to 6 range. I'm not going to list everyone out because
Mm-hmm.
putting lists, but I would say that he was comfortably 4 to 6, and he kind of showed at the start of the year his English was really really bad, right? And there were we knew that this would be an issue, but the thing about Evi is I knew from talking to Evi and from talking to other players in the team and from scrimming against him and from watching his career, like Evi is somebody who I would have imported into Europe, you know, if it was an option in 28. So Odo was a similar, like Odo was supposed to be in North America in 2018, right? Like it's public knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So Evi is somebody who I would have happily had in 2018 on Splice, right? Like he has talent. There's no question he has talent, right? It's just that he has language barrier, massive, massive language barrier, and philosophical difference in how to play the game, right? Which is that obviously he's played in Japan, he's scrimmed a lot of Chinese teams, and the way that teams play, the responsibility for a top laner in China is very different to the responsibility of a top laner in Europe or Korea, right? Which is that often you just want to play two lanes. You perma want to play two lanes all the time, and I mean, I'm not saying you never farm 3 lanes, but you want to have multiple people around mid so that you can force the pace of the game, right? Whereas Europe, when has Europe been at its most successful? It's been when 1-3-1 has been like a really really viable strategy, and the most valued skill set in a in uh in a in a European top laner historically has been how well you're able to play your side lanes. This is one of the reasons why has historically Alfari, fantastic side laner, not a very good team fighter if we're being within the context of his ability as a player. If you had a number of skill points that you were saying had been assessed, you would say that he put a lot of skill points in laning phase, a lot of skill points in side laning, and not so much in team fighting, right? Like that's the way. There's always people that get really annoyed when you go and say their favorite player, but essentially this is Alfari's skill set, right? And Alfari was considered the best top laner in Europe in years, right? The reason why people respect Odo is because of how he plays side lane. Yes, his team fighting, Odo's team fighting is good, but that's not what really, really impresses people. Same thing about Wonder, right? Wonder and Odo can team fight, but these are just additional bonuses to the fact that they know how to play side lanes and they know how to play in a 1-3-1 and they know how to use their TPs, right? These are the skill sets you value. What are the skill sets that have typically been valued from a Chinese top laner? How well you play low resource, how well you go in team fight, how decisive you are, right? Those are the 3 things that typically have been valued, right? Um, Korea, it's different, right? But I'm just talking within this context. Okay. Okay. So Evi's idea of what his role should have been as a top laner is not the same as what was expected from somebody coming into Europe, and it took him a long time to kind of adapt to that. Right? Add on top the language barrier. Add on top with in terms of when you're having discussion, how much should a top laner sacrifice? it becomes very, very difficult. And you can kind of see this situation. Like Heretics did two things really, really badly in winter. Number one is how we're using our TPs, right? Because, you know, often in Europe, the thing that will trigger you to use a TP is much the higher is a high you need a higher chance of success than maybe what you would need in you would not what you would need in say in Japan, right? Or in China,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like where they'll just trigger TPs, they see an opportunity, just go, 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 go. But when you're on a new team, new environment, new synergy, like that was awful, right? Like our TP usage was horrifically bad, and Evie didn't have the language competency in order to be able to kind of fulfill that role. And he's also in a team where, um, I mean, it didn't affect like Evie wasn't affected in the same way that Ruby was affected, but obviously with different expectations. And I would say that with Evie, this is one of the reasons why I would like one of the things you saw is that Evie would often get laning advantages 1v1. Not every game, like people will always highlight the one game where he just gets stopped, right? But he would generate advantages, and often those advantages would be squandered because him and Yankos would do a play together, and they would be on different pages, right? Because of the difficulty in communication, right? And I think we kind of saw what Evie could provide in summer split and then going into playoffs, right? Because it was very easy in summer split to make his role much more defined within the team because they changed the TPs, right? So it's like get an advance. So first 2 weeks of summer, Evie was like top three top laner in the league. I think that's not really something that well, I mean, people would argue about it, but I think he was comfortably top three. Why? Play Renekton, get your advantage, TP behind bot lane, kill bot lane, get an advantage, go 10, 20 CS down, your bot lane is 50 CS and 2 plates up. Just run the same play over and over and over again in scrims. You don't need to think, right? You don't need to think about your TP time. You don't need to trigger it. Put a TP ward behind them. TP with your lane advantage. Don't try to do anything fancy with jungle. Don't try to do anything fancy roaming to mid. Just TP behind bot lane and kill them, right? And Flakked coming into the team would comm a lot more. He was much better on comms, and this is we just did it, right? And it worked. And then we locked our kind of best of three groups. What's it called? Group stage. Our group stage place. And then we tried to do more complex things in week three, and it was really, really rough in week three. Like, I mean, let's be clear. I love Evie, but he didn't play well in week three at all, right? Uh, uh, but then coming into best of threes and best of fives, he was really, really good. He performed really well in Rogue against Rogue, really well against BDS. And against Fnatic, he was decent. He was solid, right? Like I think as a team we didn't perform that well against Fnatic, but that is the Evie that kind of I expected. Like Evie developed exactly as I expected him to be, right? It's just unfortunate that the way that the seedings worked, we can come fourth place in summer and then don't have a shot at qualifying to Worlds. But if you ask me, does that Heretics team that has Evie on it, that has Mercer on it, that has VTO on it, people who are no longer on Heretics, does that team go to Worlds if they're in the championship? Absolutely. Right, like that is a top 14 by the end of the year. It's just that the way that championship points work, it didn't work out, right? So I think that Evie was good enough to be on a team that would have gone to Worlds from Europe, right? I don't think he would have been the star of the team, but everything he was providing behind the scenes was like obviously he's a great guy. He's a really really excellent teammate. All of the intangibles are insane. But people remember him from when he was in a dysfunctional team under a lot of pressure in winter and spring, where he can't communicate. And the main shot callers on the team, Ruby is suffering from stress, and we have a rookie bot lane, and he can't communicate right with them. So I think that this is what people, and this is why he's playing Cassante all the time. By the way, he's playing Cassante all the time because he can solo play on Cassante. He doesn't need to coordinate everything with the team, right? It's also one of the reasons why his Scion was maybe not the best, right? Because you really need to coordinate with the team, right, to play Scion. Um, but yeah, so I think this to me, people look at Evie across the whole year, where really they should look at him in summer because Heretics we didn't have our team was not functioning at its best because firstly because of the communication issues, secondly because of the additional pressure that came about, but also thirdly we got COVID. We made top eight in winter. Then got COVID. Then our players got COVID coming into the into the best of threes. So we underperformed massively in the best of threes, including playing. We had to play from home against SK, I think it was, that we lost to, with like Ruby unable to speak basically and just perma coughing in comms, and then that means we're not scrimming coming into spring. So of course we start 0-3 and then we're playing catch up, and then we don't have enough time, right? Because there's not enough scrim schedule. So I think when you're judging Evi, I think people judge him too much on winter and spring and not enough on summer, which is where he was contributing at the level that we thought. And that makes me really, really sad because I think Evi was a good player. I don't think he was going to be the best top laner in Europe, but I think that he would have been a solid contributor, and maybe he would have been a solid contributor in Europe for years to come, right? But we are where we are, and I think we'll see him at Worlds next year. I know that PCS and LJL are combined, but I mean, the team basically in Japan, the team that has Evi on it wins, right? And
Pretty much, yeah.
the yeah, so that makes it sad. I'm sad that I didn't get to work with him earlier, and I'm sad um, that people's impression of him in Europe is not the best because I felt we did integrate him well. For Ruby, I think it would have just been really, really hard. Right, the way to integrate Ruby better would have been to put him on a roster with more veterans on it, and just say go and play your game. But I think that a team that has Yankos on it probably shouldn't have had Ruby on it. But again, like you have to sign Yankos. Like I can't and I don't want to say like Yankos wasn't going and saying kick Ruby no matter what. Like he was always been very, very professional about his teammates and things like this. But yeah, those two like should never have been on the same team. Right? That's what I would say.
We see that happen a lot where like people that shouldn't be on the same team, like Dardoch and Kabe, like should never be
Yep.
on the same team. They play the exact opposite style, and that's what everyone said when they signed Kabe. And then exactly what happened is like they got rid of Kabe and Dardoch because they just couldn't play together.
Yeah.
And we see that even just putting people in really bad situations, with like Shaden on EG, where like you're subbing him in and out, and I don't necessarily from what we've heard about him, I don't think he might do very well with being subbed in and out. And you wonder what happened with Fikla and Prince. You wonder what happened, with even Mike Young back on TSM when he's playing with like literally the best bot lane in the West and Bjergsen, and he's like the only rookie on a super high intensity team. Like maybe that's not where you want to put a rookie. Winsome Isles, like all of these new players that could be the next, Mickey X, that could be the next Yankos. It seems like in North America we're not able to put them in position to succeed, and very few end up. It's not that we don't see that we have good rookies, like you said, Palafox, everyone knew was going to be good, but then C9 chose to go with Perks because why wouldn't you sign Perks? You have like APA
By fire.
being Firefire.
Well,
He
I,
retired,
I mean,
and
sorry to interrupt on this, but like copy Firefire, right? Like
yeah,
those guys should have played LCS, right? And they should have been allowed to fail in LCS. Like this is the problem, right? You fail and then you're done. And like Palafox, the fact that everyone knew he was going to be good is what gave him his second chance, right? Like I mean, obviously, like coaches have eyes, right? And they can look, right? But there was no question that Palafox was going to get a second chance at some point, right? But Poppy and Firefire didn't even get their first chance, and to me, that's the tragedy, right? It's you have to be allowed if you want to develop as well as you possibly can be. You have to be allowed to fail, right? And even Perks, because we mentioned Perks, and Yankos, they've had bad splits. I mean, my Azir is bad, my Rise is bad, my Azir is worse. You guessed it right on
yeah.
QT Perks. I mean, I've got to now that I'm working with him, I've got to go. I've got to cover for a team of heretics. Perks. Well, I've got to think of one. But no, but no, I fully agree with you, right? And it's about, and in Evi's case, I mean, it's sad for Evi, right? But Evi is what, 27, 28? He's going to go back to Japan. He's going to qualify for Worlds for a couple more years, and then, I don't, esports players' careers are getting longer, right? So who knows, right? But and then he's going to stream, and then he's going to be like, he's set, right? Like it's not,
Yeah.
like I feel sad it didn't work out personally because I like Evi a lot. I think he's underrated, right? But at the end of the day, he's going to be fine, right? Like it's sad, but he's going to be fine. But what about I'm just trying to think.
I mean,
But
just
what
Ruby,
about
right?
yeah? Right, but I mean, Ruby as well was a veteran for many many years, right? Like Ruby is not like some rookie out of nowhere. Rookie played in LPL and was fine
Oh,
in LPL.
that is true. Yeah.
Uh, but I mean, like Jack, right? Like it's obvious,
Mm.
like Jack Spectre. Like I think Jack Spectre is good. I think he wasn't the right fit for the team that Heretics put around him. Right? Again, different project shifted, and there's no question that Flackett should be in the league. Right? In a team that has Yankos in it, and especially a team that has Wanda Yankos perks, Kaiser. Like Flackett is the AD carry you want, right? Like he's the AD carry. Like what he provides is really like his flexibility, his his ability to play weak side, his ability to com at the right time, to recognize when comms, his ability to bring people together, right? Because Flackett is like a very happy-go-lucky, the way that he behaves on social media and like in post-game lobby with Yankos is literally like how he is as a human
Oh,
being.
okay.
He's probably one of the happiest-go-lucky, right? But it's not the right time for Jack, right? But you know, Jack is somebody who deserves a chance on a different team, and he's somebody that I would vouch for, and which sounds ridiculous as a coach that went and said that Flackett should come and play instead of him. But like, Jack hasn't had that chance either, right? And to me, that's sad, right? Like that, the tragedy for me, it's a little bit on Evie, but it's mainly on Jack, and that's kind of my regret from 2022, right? And then 2023, sorry. And at least he won the Iberia Cup, right? He won the Iberia Cup, the Spanish off-season tournament. So he won something this year. But obviously everyone's really really hyped for Kalist, who's the like prodigy K-Corp guy, right? So he's going to be first in line to get promoted. But what does that mean for Jack in the future? And obviously, like the only thing that I can do on my side is make sure that our coaching staff is working with the academy, make sure he's getting the best help that he can to look as good as he possibly can, so that he gets a shot in the future. Um, yeah, but I agree with you, right? And sometimes just because somebody doesn't look good in a certain environment doesn't mean that they can't find success in another environment.
So how do you set up an environment that is conducive to these players playing well? I mean I come from a pedagogy like education background, and one of the things I truly believe in is like a lot of times you are giving the wrong tools to the student, and then when he's not succeeding, you are blaming the student as not being smart, when in reality he might be a really good swimmer and not a very good climber, and if you put things from the perspective of a swimmer, he would understand it immediately. But the fact that you're telling him to climb just doesn't make sense to him. And I think it's probably I do think it's very important that when you're building a team that you're you're sort of managing these play styles, personalities, and like veteranship, leadership. I mean, even on EG, you had Impact inspired, and then you had Vulcan as well, and then you had like the rookies. We've seen teams try to like emulate that, but not succeed. So how do you go about building a cohesive team, like a group of 5 players?
First thing you need is stability, right? And you can't have long-term planning without stability, and you can't have long-term planning around a particular project because when we talk about project, we're talking about personality mixes as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't have like when Inspired came into EG, there's a so Inspired's reputation is that he's pretty toxic. He is not toxic, right? He is like this is something that's really really frustrating to me about Inspired, right? But Inspired is very direct, but there's toxic and there's direct, right? Like toxic is I made a mistake, but you made a worse mistake, right? To me as a coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas direct is this is something which we're doing wrong. We need to fix it now, right? Like enough of this. Like we've done it wrong 4 times in the past 4 scrims. We're not going to do it wrong in the fifth scrim, right? It's different, right? Like one thing is blame shifting. One thing is like let's not waste time, right? Like this is the issue. We all know the issue. Let's get it right, right? And so, but the thing is that when Inspired was brought into the team, Inspired wasn't brought in because he's just like a, a really top player, right? He's brought
Mm-hmm.
into the team because we know that the personality, we know he's going to mesh well with Impact. We know that he's going to mesh well with JoJo. We know that he's well, we didn't know like Vulcan was available very very late in the offseason, right? But we know the main concern is how's he going to match with JoJo? Right? Is he willing to play with JoJo, right? And I think that one thing which is maybe underrated a bit is how much Mystiques, who was JoJo's support, I think he's coaching now, but he's played in the LEC, EULCS back in the day, Mystiques. But he was our academy support. How much he vouched, for JoJo, and I've been told that it always confused me why, because JoJo has like a lot of Polish fans. And I've never understood why, because it's so rad. Even in when he was in academy, we had like Polish players like asking to co-stream our academy games, and I was like, why? Just why? But I found out later that like Mystiques had been vouching for him a lot and like saying, "Oh, this guy's gonna be the next Caps. He's gonna be, I don't think he said Caps, right? But he's gonna be super super good. Just you wait. Just he's 17. He's gonna be so." And like everyone was getting really hyped. Um, so maybe that played into it a little bit, but yeah, you know we knew that the personality mixes were going it was going to work on the personality mix side, right? And if in a sense, this I think is the failure of Heretics last year. Although summer again, Heretics in summer is where if we had Yankos from the start of the year, is where we would have been, right? Like a Yankos roster, that is what a Yankos roster looks like. It's not the same as winter and spring, but the two things are going to be combined, and it's very very frustrating. But you need stability. You need to kind of understand what are the rules of engagement within your roster, right? Like how direct are you going to be? How much mistakes are you willing to tolerate? How much limit testing is okay? How much, and these kind of things, you need to have a clear understanding and a clear match of understanding between coaching staff and players for how you want to function as an org, right? And this is something which I think everyone in Europe right now thinks Mad Lions are going to be trash, right? Like I don't think Mad Lions are going to be trash. I think Mad Lions have four players who've worked together with their current coach. They all have very very clear understanding on what they think is acceptable practice, and they're going to be pretty good at the start of the year. We're going to see whether they're going to I have doubts about whether they're going to be able to continue that momentum, but I think Mad Lions are going to be really good. Like, doesn't mean that I like what they did to Mac, doesn't mean that I like what they did to their coaching staff, but I think that those rules of engagement are going to be in place, and I think they're actually good. I think they're going to be like a fourth, fifth place team coming into winter, and then I think they're going to fall off. But I think that same thing we're going to see in Vitality, right? You have Kazi, you have Hilasang, you have Mac. Really good understanding of how you want a team to function. But if you don't have this kind of stability in place, and you don't have a coach that functions well with the veterans and understands what a team environment requires, how can you possibly succeed? Right? You go and put a happy-go-lucky player, and you go and put him in the most try-hard roster. I mentioned Perks because Perks is legendary for this, right? Like what Perks wants out of his roster is he doesn't want people to mess around. He wants people to be as efficient as they can and to like take every scrim seriously and to not waste anyone's time and to just try hard, try hard, try hard, try hard, push it as hard as you possibly can. You go and put Kazi into that roster, like into a roster, Kazi as a rookie into a roster like that, or Flackett as a rookie into a roster like that. As a veteran with 3 years, it's different, right? But as a rookie, how can they succeed? And maybe that's the only chance that they get, right? And that is, to me, why it's so important that players think about these kind of things. Like they think about coaching staff and the thing that they're going to have. They think about team environment. They think about culture within the team, and that's not how things currently work at least in Europe. I don't know how they work in North America. It's normally who's going to give me 20k more, and if you take 20k more a year, that's a lot of money when you're 17.
Mm,
But if you get that, you're going to make more than that over your career if you put yourself in the right environment, right? And you see this with Kempi, right? When Kempi went to Immortals, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, to me, that's a tragedy. To me, Shaden, I have some sympathy for Shaden, but I don't have full sympathy for Shaden because Shaden was supposed to come up with JoJo at the same time. In a sense, that was maybe good for Contracts because Contracts was the one who came in to replace him because 100 Thieves didn't release Contracts until very late in the offseason. So basically, the only reason he ended up on EG was because Shaden got his ban, but Shaden got 18 months worth of toxicity ban where he could have come up at the same time. So my sympathy is a little bit less, but I do still sympathize, right? Like you deserve it. Like just because you missed out on one chance doesn't mean you don't deserve a proper shot. right? And I think Kenvi and Shaden are two people that I hope get the chances that they deserve. But people like Copy didn't even get a single chance, right? Which is to me an even bigger tragedy.
So let's say you're the GM of FlyQuest. I mean, I don't want you to put a roster, but how do you, as a coach of FlyQuest, say like, I've never played with Bippo, but he has like a public persona. I've never played with Jensen, but he has a public persona. I don't, you know, Inspired is known to be heavily toxic, even though you say no, he's direct. And I think you're the only person that's ever gone on publicly and multiple times said that Inspired is not toxic, he's direct, and those are very different things.
Yeah.
And then you're bringing, like, I would call Busio a rookie, even though he technically, by Riot's rules, he isn't, but he's still new to the league, and Masu. How can you, I mean, I'm outside, I don't know their personalities. You're a coach. How can you say, okay, I think these personalities would go well? You have the super intense, like, or super direct, Inspired. You have like Whippo, who might be a little bit more lighthearted but intense at the same. Like, how do you do that unless you actually play with them?
I mean, it's very interesting you talk about FlyQuest because obviously, uh, there's the rumors that Bwipo had verbal agreement with an EU team and backed out on his verbal agreement to join FlyQuest.
And
Just
there's a
rumors, of course. Like,
rumor. There's a rumor that
I couldn't
yeah.
possibly comment. I couldn't possibly imply that certain players have had verbal agreements with European teams multiple seasons in a row and backed out on them multiple seasons in a row. But look, what I would say about FlyQuest is FlyQuest know the coaching staff that they have, right? I think they put Nuke Duck in as head coach, I think,
Yes.
which
Who they brought
is
from what's it called? From 100.
from the 100 Thieves, right?
Yeah.
Let me just 100% because again I know the North American rosters, but off season was 2 months ago, and I'm not thinking about North American rosters in the last 2 months. Yeah, it's Golden Glue? No, Golden Glue is 100 Thieves. It's Nuke Duck, right? Yeah, it is Nuke
Yes.
Duck. Okay, so okay, let me think very carefully about what I'm going to say here. Okay, so Andrew Barton and Papa Smithy are not stupid. Okay, like they're really, really knowledgeable about the game, um, and they have a good idea of how to put systems into place. Okay, number one thing. The roster that they have on paper has a lot of mechanical talent, right? Like I think Busio has the potential to be the best support in North America, and I think he has the potential to be the best sport in North America. I don't think he's going to be the best sport in North America next year. He's got a long way to catch up to Vulcan, Core JJ, people like this, but he has the potential to be the best sport in North America. Okay. You have Inspired, who was the MVP of the league the last time he was playing, right? Oh, no, no, the time before last, right?
Because
Because
he played once,
EG
but
Spring,
yeah.
yeah, he played once, but okay, on the team, and you have a veteran, and then you have Masu, who is like considered to be like the next up and coming AD carry in the league, right? And I don't think Masu has like Danny levels of talent, but like I think he's good, right? Like I think his laning phase is definitely better. Team fighting, I don't think like the thing about Danny is that Danny had this ability to just like he's more like an artist, like plays on instinct, just came up. Yeah, so I think Danny is like an artist. He's somebody that played the game since he was 4 years old. Like the way that he breaks team fights down, he couldn't. Sometimes he wouldn't even be able to explain why he was doing the things he was doing. He just knew what the right thing to do was. Right? Like I would have a talk with him, and he was like, "This is. I knew that this is what I needed to do in order to win this. Right? Just pure instinct, like that. That's kind of who Danny was. I don't think Masu is like that. I think Masu's his laning phase is better. I think he's smart. He's very calculated in what he wants to do, and he has good mechanics, right? But but I don't think he's like pure instinct. But I think that he's good, right? Like I think. I really, really hate to make comparisons like this, but I think he's better than Yeon. Right? I think he's better than Yeon. I think he's better than like Tactical. I think he's better than Tomo. I think like he is the best. He's going to be the best North American AD carry in the league next season. Doesn't mean I think those guys are bad, but I think let's put it in that. I really hate making these comparisons because the amount of hate that I get from people is like huge. But I think he's good, right? Like I think this is good, and anyone that's worked with Inspired knows that Inspired is able to work with rookies, and everyone knows that how Inspired and Jojo interact, but the way that Inspired and Danny interact is things that you wouldn't see behind. But he was always doing tiny things to look out for Danny, right? Especially like I think more than anyone else within that team, he was the guy who was looking out for him the most. But he wasn't the kind of guy who was like, you know, putting an arm around him and taking him for dinner or something, right? It's always like, how's he feeling, or what can I do to make him feel, to help him out, right? And this kind of thing. Always this kind of always looking out for people within the team, right? This is why, like, again, this is the defense I will make of Inspired, right? Like that he's always looking out for his teammates and he cares, and that is a big difference, right? Because not everyone does. Okay, so anyway, so this is kind of the roster you have now. Putting Jensen and Bwipo in this roster is not what I would do, right? But that doesn't mean that. And why not? It's because Jensen is somebody who's legendary limit tester in scrims. Like, will often make scrims about him and about his performance. Um, and Bwipo is somebody who likes to limit test on weak side a lot, right? And there's a time and a place for doing that, right? But when you have rookies who are coming into the team who need to develop their fundamentals, that's a very dangerous combination, right? Like I think Bwipo personality wise, and I think Inspired personality wise are really good people to put with rookies. Jensen, I just don't know Jensen. I don't know what he's like as a human being. All I know is what I've seen in scrims. But Fly, but the danger with the FlyQuest roster is you have no structure in any of your scrims, right? Because Jensen and Bwipo are testing their lane matchups and limit testing and seeing what they can get. So the game is blown open early on, so you don't get the structure that your rookies need to be able to develop and fill into their roles, right? Now, FlyQuest aren't idiot, right? Like Andrew Barton and Papa Smithy aren't idiots. They know this too, right? But they still made this decision. So they clearly think that putting Nuke Duck into the team and putting whatever other coaching staff around him means that they will have that. They believe that Nuke Duck is going to be able to keep Whippo and keep Jensen in check to make sure that they are fundamentally doing what the team needs in order to be able to succeed, right? That's otherwise they wouldn't build this roster, right? Like it's not if it was not okay. I'm not going to call out any GMs, but there are some other GMs in this league who, if they built this roster, I would be thinking, holy shit, like, what are they doing, right? But like this, I don't think with Andrew and with Papa Smithy that this is what's going to happen, right? Um, but again, this is not personally the roster I would build because as a coach, I would see this as a really, really big challenge, whereas I just want to be focusing on developing my rookies. So, maybe I would have a different mid laner, maybe a rookie mid laner, maybe like, somebody else, right? But again, they know Jensen better than I do. But when you're building a team, this is a challenge that FlyQuest will have, and we're going to learn a lot about Nuke Duck as a coach, and we're going to learn a lot about Inspired and Bwipo veterans this year, right? Because let's be clear, if they fuck up Masu and Busio, it will be really, really sad, right? Because North America very rarely has S tier talent, and Busio is S tier, and Masu. I don't know if Masu is S tier, but he's definitely A plus.
Mm-hmm.
And so the players, the pieces that they have function. It's about getting them to function together. Sorry, that was a really long answer for something I could have said in 5 minutes.
No, that's good. I mean, I do think that I don't have faith in FlyQuest because they messed up Vikla and Prince. And, obviously it was a different coaching staff and whatnot, but I have no faith that, for example, Masu, he's pretty young, and I'm sure his family. Is Nuke Dog going to be the person that comes in and involves his family and makes sure that Masu feels comfortable in an environment with, like, technically four, veterans, but like really three veterans? Is he going to understand how to develop a rookie? Has he ever worked with teenagers before? Like before 100 Thieves, I guess. Like all these questions I have, and I don't feel confident I would be more confident with Golden Glue because at least he worked, on the Academy side or Challengers or whatever it's called. Maybe, yeah. It seems like, for example, the Shopify Rebellion roster,
Yeah.
I think makes sense. Everyone's worked with Revan before. Obviously, there's the big question of Bvoy and like, is he really the leader? He doesn't really talk. At least from Pain Gaming, their like documentary, he almost never
Yep.
talks, and I had to go scouring through like 8 episodes to find him speak once. And I was like, okay, I
Yep.
can't make a video on him. Um, so yeah, like it just seems like our roster building is is not it.
If I mean, again, I don't know Nuke Duck well, but let me put it this way: if Mac was in charge of FlyQuest, do you think that they would compete for the title? I think they would, right?
I think so.
Because he's,
Yeah.
but that's so. So our question is not necessarily on the roster building; it's on experience and coaching stuff,
Mm,
right? And I think that is like I think that's it's an interesting question. But again, they have their interview process. I'm sure that they've done their due diligence, right? Like there's a lot of very good coaches that were available this offseason. Like I was shocked by how many good coaches are coming up, right? So they've decided for Duke Duck, very similar from what I understand to Mithy as a coach, very very knowledgeable about the game. Don't know what he's like as a human being, so we just have to see, right? But for Shopify, I fully agree with you, right? But the interesting thing about Shopify is that they already have leadership, right? They have like Boogie,
Boogie.
Insanity,
Yeah.
Revan work well together. Like I mean, it's really clear. Like Revan wants his players to innovate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like and they played Graves mid. They played like Insanity is clearly one of those guys who's willing to buy into what his coach wants, right? Like, because I'm pretty sure Insanity isn't the one who's coming and saying, "I want to play Gravesmith," right? I'm pretty
He
sure
said
it's
he said
like,
it was Revan.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure it was Revan. I'm pretty sure it
Yeah.
was Revan. Um, so in a sense, it's very interesting. So, but they know that they have good working relationship, right? Um, Fake God is very very quiet. Before is very very quiet, so they're not going to go and kind of change the culture of the team. Um, Zazel, I've heard, is very, very vocal. He's a very, very good leader in game. So I kind of agree with this, right? You have a core of three people who work really, really well together. They have common understanding over what they want to do in the game. You bring in two people who aren't going to really impact the culture because they're kind of like followers people, uh, and this to me is smart roster building. Now, do I think FlyQuest are going to do better than Shopify? Probably, because look at the names, but I could see it blowing up. Like I could see Shopify doing better. And it's interesting that you mentioned the Kobe thing, because this is something that I think that you know sometimes when you have somebody like Kobe, you put him in a roster with Dardoch and Broken Blade. What does Kobe need? Kobe is one of the best team fighting AD carries in the West. Just come from a world championship where he was like beating Asian AD carries, out team fighting them, but needs a front line, right? And then you put the best carry top laner and like Dardoch, who is a carry jungler around this, who's playing zone control for your AD carry. Right? Nobody's playing zone control for your AD carry. Like you can't put that's a 1-3-1 team, right? And then why you even have Kobe on your team, right? You're just gonna have him sit mid and clear mid waves. I mean, it's crazy, right? But yeah, going on to roster building for this year, I actually like what Shopify have done. Fake God, let's see. I think Fake God will be under a lot of pressure. He'll feel that he's got a lot to prove. There's some decent top laners in. I think Tenacity doesn't have a team, right?
Tenacity, no.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. There's some decent top laners. Like I know Faisal is in academy. I know that there's some other like Sati.
Soti, yeah.
Yeah, like there's people there that top lane in North America. I think top lane and jungle are probably the deepest roles in North America, and he knows he's under pressure. And let's see how he deals with it, because it's not easy. It's not easy to come back in knowing you're under the pressure, and let's see how much time that they give him. But and Licorice, of course. Licorice is not doesn't have a team as well, right?
Yeah, Licorice
Because
Revenge,
of
yeah.
Golden Guardians. Yeah, and Revenge, right? So Fake God will have to justify his place, and that to me is the scary thing, right? Because how will he deal with that amount of pressure? Because he's going to be under much more pressure than anyone else on this team, and they have to kind of make him comfortable. So let's see. But I obviously Shopify probably had 20% of the budget of FlyQuest, but like what they've done with their budget is very interesting. Bvoy, I mean, Bvoy is solid, right? I don't know whether there's people like, in Europe, for instance, there's like other Korean. If you wanted a Korean AD carry, there's somebody like Bao in Europe who I think should probably play LEC one day. Obviously, I think Jack is really good, but I don't know if Jack would want to go to North America this early in his career. But like there's Korean options in Europe, that they could have gone with. But they went with Bvoy. Let's see how it works out. I mean, this is obviously some they've seen something in him. I think he's solid, but I don't think he's going to set the world alight. I think this team is going to be about how mid jungle play. So
I
let's see.
will say that it has come out that actually Shopify had money to spend, maybe not FlyQuest level money, but
Yeah,
they could have had whoever they wanted in AD carry, and they chose
interesting,
Bvoy. So
interesting,
yeah,
interesting.
that's one thing that people were saying, like, okay, maybe they just needed a minimum, vet, and that's why they got Bvoy. And it's like, no,
Yeah,
they could have had Meech. They could have had. I mean, I'm sure they could have had King. They could have had all the. There's a bunch of good AD
yeah.
carries, and they chose Bvoy. So, I do have one last question, um, and it's more about should players consider going to Europe? Like Insanity, for example, almost didn't get a spot after Academy died or Challengers died. Dignitas let go of their team, and he was teamless. And if it wasn't for what happened with Ruby, which is very unfortunate for Ruby, but very fortunate for Insanity, he probably wouldn't have had a team. There's Licorice doesn't have a team. Revenge doesn't have a team. It almost makes more sense to go play for ERL and develop. Like if Palafox, APA, Insanity were not American, they're European, would they have become the next humanoid, next Caps? I'm not saying that they're not good.
Yeah.
I'm just saying like
Yeah.
to get to that S tier level,
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And I think that this is something NA players should not treat Europe as a last resort. Um, why? Well, firstly, there were rumors that Jojo could have gone to Europe this off season. So I think that you know, maybe Jojo should have gone to Europe this off season. But there are NA fans will hate me for saying that. But if the thing is that Europe has always been treated as like a last resort, right? Like I don't have it, but if you want to go to Europe, what really really matters, you go there, you go and play the solo queue, you climb high in the solo queue. Like if you get top 50 in EU solo queue, you will get a trial. You will get trials with teams, right? But the problem is that it's been so much easy. Like it's easier to, well, firstly, it's very expensive to go to Europe. So in order to justify the expense, you have to be willing to do things like stream and things like this, which not everyone does, right? Or you know, come from a family that will fund you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once you're in Europe, I don't think it's that expensive. Like there's some countries in Europe where you can get a gaming house and things, but again, you're then going to be in isolation for long periods of time. It's not that easy. But if you are serious about going to EU, going to Europe, Worlds is in Europe this year. So go there not when World starts. Go there a month before the other teams are there. Climb high in solo queue, hold your solo queue ranking when Worlds happens, and you will get trials. Like 100%. Like if you are high in solo queue, if you are top 50 in solo queue in Europe, you will get trials with top teams in Europe. And this is and by top teams I mean ERL teams, right?
Okay,
Like
I was gonna clarify. I was gonna ask.
no, G2 are not picking you because you're rank one in solo queue. No. But this is, you know, it's it's hard for me to look at what's happening in North America right now without frustration, right? Because obviously, like I think that there is talent in North America, but I think that the system in North America has failed that talent for many, many years. And now you can't even have a stable career by playing the tier two. And like what happened with Academy being removed, where overnight 70 people lost their jobs minimum, not counting, managers and things like this.
Mhm.
Like that's not going to happen in EU, right? Like the scene is much more robust, and maybe the Arabic League pays good money, Spain pays good money, France pays good money, Poland used to. I don't know if they still do. But there's lots of regions where you don't have you can go full time, and keep doing well, and you'll get your shot at LEC. And this is something which the default. I mentioned coaches being considered good because they were Korean rather than being good because they were good coaches that happened to be from Korea. I think the opposite. There's kind of the opposite prejudice against North Americans, which is that you can't possibly be good if you're North American. Actually, ironically, I think Bucio could have made it as a mid laner if he wasn't North American in NA. But obviously as a sport, he's really good. But in Europe there is no way that Copy would not have played LEC. I don't know if he would. I don't know. Maybe he would have had a career like Certus or in LEC where he plays for 1 year and that's it. But he wait, did Certus only play 1 year? I think Certus only played 1 year. Maybe he played 2 years. I can't remember. But the point is, maybe he doesn't blow the world up. Maybe he doesn't become the next Caps or something. But he would have had a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and that tragedy, right? So. Yeah, so cycling, I think that's kind of what I would say on that. I think it should be considered. I think that this year is the best year possible because Worlds is in Europe, so people are going to be focused on solo queue in Europe in a way that they won't be focused on before. Which is why it's so important. But it's important as well to go before World starts because you need to be able to establish yourself there before the Koreans come. Because when the Koreans come, nobody like you'll just be an afterthought. You'll be like, oh, who's in Faker's game? Is it like
Mm.
Licorice? Well, I mean Licorice. Everyone knows who Licorice is. Is it Sati? Okay. Is it? Oh, it's just Sati, right? Whereas if you've climbed to top 10 as Sati in EU solo queue, it's like this is top 10 EU versus top 10 EU solo queue player Sati versus like I mean hard or something. And I haven't looked at the Korean rosters as much and stuff. But let's see how they do. Zeus, right? Let's see how these guys go and play. Whereas it would just otherwise be, oh, Zeus is in the game. Oh, that's interesting. Sati is in the game too. Oh, like it's different.
That
It's
makes
different.
sense. Yeah. All right. Is there anything at the end of the interview that you want to shout out? Maybe any shows you're gonna appear on next, or things that you plan on doing?
No, just thank you for having me. Sorry for talking on. I know I do like to talk. So this is like yeah, so sorry for going roundabout and all of this, and no, just it's going to be a very interesting year in North America this year. And there's a lot of upheaval doesn't always have to be a bad thing. Because when you have upheaval within a scene, it forces people to reassess and reprioritize and change kind of their fundamentals and their objectives and their methods of their rules of interaction, right? Like how they're going to function as teams, and it's very frustrating as an outsider who cares about development of regional talent what's happened in North America this year, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this can't be successful. Right? And that doesn't mean that I think an 8-team league is better for the scene or that no academy is better for the scene. Like that's absurd, right? But it doesn't mean that it's completely doomed. Right? And I'd say, I'll be watching NA. Uh, I I hate to cheer for super teams, but I feel kind of obliged to cheer for JoJo. But definitely, like, I'll be interested to see how many ganks go mid in the first FlyQuest versus C9 game of the season. That's what I was.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you enjoyed, please subscribe as that really helps out this channel. And let me know down below who you want me to interview next.